We also are broadcasting this live on Zoom, and also Mr. Bowler is broadcasting this. We also are broadcasting this live. So we welcome you. Just a few housekeeping items this evening. For those who are here in attendance, we will have the opportunity for you to speak. Tonight we won't be engaging back and forth and answering questions, but we will be writing those down and can answer them at the end of the meeting for you, or we will get back with you after the meeting. And Ned will be writing those questions down for us. Those who are with us virtually this evening, John Call will be managing that. If you have a comment, if you would just raise your hand, and you can communicate that to us in two ways. One, either by chat, and John will read that, or we feel like we've got it where we can broadcast your question or your comment this evening. I would like to make mention that Councilman Barker is with us electronically tonight. Some of you may know he had an accident a couple of days ago, and he's kind of laid up and not able to be with us tonight. And Councilwoman Ekstrom had some surgery on her knee, so she's also with us tonight electronically. We'll begin our meeting tonight. We've asked Councilman Severing if he would lead us in the invocation and also in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Councilman Severing.
Heavenly Father, we come before Thee tonight and we express to Thee collectively our gratitude for the abundance that we enjoy. We're grateful to live in an incredible city with incredible citizens. As we meet this night to discuss the needs for finances for the city, pray that we might be able to have a spirit of understanding and and also camaraderie as we consider the needs collectively of all the citizens, and give thanks that we have the opportunity to have a republic and a democratic process that allows us to be together. Again, exceed thy spirit upon us, ask blessings upon those in the city who might need additional strength and as they endure challenges and health challenges. Again, give thanks and pray for this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. You will repeat the Pledge of Allegiance with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Severing. We appreciate that. Up on the screen, and probably electronically, you can see our agenda for this evening. I'll say a few comments to introduce our process tonight. We have with us our Director of Finance, Evan Nelson. He'll be participating tonight. And we have several council members that will also be participating tonight. We'll start with our public hearing after my comments and introduction. And I just want to go through an outline here. We have also with us tonight, and I failed to acknowledge John Bond, who's the treasurer for Weaver County. And we're appreciative that he is here with us tonight. We've asked him to just spend a few minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, giving us some insight on the tax process. So he'll be spending some time with us. Once again, he won't be answering any questions, but would be happy to take questions via the net, and we can call his office tomorrow, or we can try to answer those this evening. We'll be talking about our budget proposal a little bit this evening. Well, let me just first talk about why we're going through this process. First of all, this is your money, obviously, that you've entrusted to us, and so we surely want your input and suggestions this evening. But this process is something that's defined in the state law through which the city council can approve an increase in property tax revenue. The proposed increase that we're talking about tonight is approximately just under $225,000. This would be above the amount that the city would normally collect without making any adjustments. We base this on an average home price of $329,000, which we feel is the median in our area. For those who fit into that category, the increase would be just over $32 a year. So we have properly noticed this. We've mailed the property owners. I think that was on your tax assessment that came out, showed we were having a hearing tonight too. It's been published in the newspaper, and it was also posted on the city website and the Utah Public Notice website. And the purpose tonight is to allow residents to comment on the proposed tax increase. I would just like to spend a few minutes sharing with you some thoughts that I jotted down. I think it's important that we try to understand the genesis and where we're coming from on this. First of all, this is, I think, new for most of the council members, and maybe even some of you here. We have not had a truth in taxation hearing, I think, since 2003, so 17 years. And I understand that tonight, taxes is an emotional word, and nobody likes those. And as Councilman Swanson reminds me that we also pay taxes to the city, so this also affects us. So this is a pretty unique time, I think. Our country and city is in the midst of uncertain times, conditions that probably most of us have never faced before. And unfortunately, there's no operational manual or all the analysis of projections that based upon historical information is probably irrelevant. If we could go to the next slide, I had to insert this. I read this in the newspaper the other day, and many of you have probably seen this too. U.S. expects record-breaking economic downturn. I believe that the gross domestic product (GDP) was down over 32% last quarter. Fortunately, we're not seeing to that extent a decrease in our economy here in North Ogden. Also, I read a headline that says Fed wrestles with next moves as virus stalls U.S. economy. So even well-known economists can't agree. Somebody told me economists like the weather now, they only have to be right 50% of the time. And I don't think we have any agreement on that. I would just like to say these hearings are definitely not pleasant, but they're necessary. I just would remind you that you have elected us as your officials to not necessarily make the popular decisions, but to have courage to make the right decisions. And I hope tonight that you can see with the information that we'll share with you the reason for this proposed tax increase. The initial motivation when we started looking at our budget and the shortfall, the motivation probably for this was COVID-19 and the result of the uncertainty created by COVID and the estimated decrease in revenues. And we made our best guess on the information we had at the time, but as we made those estimates, we shortly noticed we had a budget shortfall. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as our council people participate in explaining that. We estimated we'd have about a 20% decrease in sales tax and a substantial decrease in our Class C road funds for the sale of gas. Now, that's probably anybody's best guess. I would tell you at this point in time, we've been very fortunate. We have not seen a decrease in our sales tax revenues at this point in time. But once again, because of the uncertainty, we don't know what the future will bring. We have seen a decrease in our revenues from gas tax. I think all of us know that most of our citizens in the state are driving less. A lot of people are working from home. So at this point in time, I just want to be totally transparent. We have not seen a decrease. In fact, sales tax has been pretty vibrant at this point in time, but we don't know the future. As I thought about this, I thought, can this trend really continue on with sales? As you know, I'm in the retail business, and we saw quite a spike as the pandemic started. And we've seen that kind of sliding back more to normal. So I'm not sure the trends we're seeing today can continue. I'm not sure how much longer the federal government can continue to pump the kind of money they're putting into the economy. Most of you know that the extra $600 on unemployment ended this last week. And so I think there's still some struggles that we'll be facing in the economy. So later, Councilman Swanson will be sharing some information with us. And he'll be talking about some of the cuts that the department heads have made. As we approached this, the first thing we did is we went to department heads and we said, we need your help. We've got a substantial budget shortfall. And asked each department to eliminate some of the things in their department. I know I've had some questions on what those cuts were, and I think Councilman Swanson in his presentation will talk about that. But as I reviewed those, some of the cuts are sustainable, some are not. And what I mean by that is I don't think we can continue to tell the police chief that we can't hire additional police officers in a growing city. By my calculation, police officer, by the time we give them equipment, salary, it's probably over $100,000 per officer. And we can't continue to tell him no. We did it this year. He asked for 2 officers and we had to tell him no. So some of these things are sustainable that we've asked our department heads to do, some are not. And as you'll see in Councilman Swanson's presentation tonight, a good portion of our budget deficit is being made up by using what I call a rainy day fund, which is the balance that's accumulated over many years in our general fund. I don't think we can continue to rely on rainy day fund to operate your city. So we looked at that very carefully. And this is a complex, it seems really simple, but it's somewhat complex. I've had citizens call me and say, well, why don't you cut the flowers out before you ask us for a tax increase? I've had other suggestions made on, now we're gonna have to increase taxes because of our garbage situation. Garbage is an enterprise fund. It's a business that generates its own revenue through fees. The flowers that we've talked about, those are paid for out of RDA funds. Those aren't paid out of our property tax. So things that sometimes seem simple are a little bit more complex. Now, I would be amiss if I didn't applaud the efforts of our past city council. As I mentioned earlier this evening, we haven't had a truth and taxation hearing since 2003. I don't know how many of you who are in business or even in your own budget have been able to outdo inflation like the city has, but I want to applaud them for their efforts there. But at the same time, I want to say it's created a little bit of a long-term problem for us. And tonight, I hope that we can convey the message that what we're trying to do is put the city on a long-term financial basis, that it can continue to be a great place to live. Many of you drive around the city like I do. And you look at the conditions of our roads, for instance. We have many roads that haven't been repaved or touched in this city for over 20 years. Jim Uria, many of you who know Jim, called me the other day and he said, I want you to go look at something for me. And he says, this is not unusual in our city. And he gave me the address and I went over and looked at this. The manhole was 3 inches above the pavement in the road. I think we had a study done, Councilman Swanson, you were probably here, not 6 years ago, and I think the estimated amount for us to have adequate roads to support the city, $10 million to make things right in our roads. And I've had calls from citizens asking me to come and look at the roads, and we have problems in the city if you want to drive around and look at some of our roads. And, I don't think we're talking about $10 million for new old roads. But, our city continues to grow. And our commitment is that we will try to have smart growth in the city. I was involved in a meeting the other day. They said we have a shortfall of housing in this state of 41,000 homes that we are short on having, and we're getting our share of those out here. But the mechanism to fund what I call essential services, which is providing public safety and basic services, have become reliant on what I call economic-related taxes. At one time in the city, the property taxes collected funded our entire police department. I believe today that's right around 50%. That Councilman Swanson says it's even lower than that, 40-something percent. So if we use every dollar of property taxes to fund our public safety group, we would be 58% short. And we've been very fortunate in this city to have a good police force and a pretty safe community. That can change with growth, but if we are proactive in our public safety department, I think we can continue to have the safe environment in which we operate today. Many of you may or may not know this, but with growth, obviously, we need to have additional parks. We have some beautiful parks in our city. Today, I believe our park impact fees has a negative $3+ million negative balance. That means that we're spending property tax dollars instead of money collected from development to fund parks. And I don't know how we can continue to do that, frankly. We have an amphitheater that many of you are familiar with that's unfinished. I believe I was talking with Tiffany Staley today, who's our Parks and Recreation Director. And based upon the initial plan, that was designed to take over $2 million to finish that project. So the intended purpose, too, of looking at the long-term finance plan for the city is, many of you know, about 20 years ago now, we purchased a lot of property from the Barker family. And the intent of that purchase was to have a beautiful park in our city. We have not done a lot with that. If, and I'm not saying that's the case, if we move forward with living up to that intended purpose of buying that ground, it's over a $10 million bill to build the kind of park that's designed there. So we have to operate the city just like many of you who have been in business and in our homes. We understand costs are rising. Additionally, this year, we asked many of our city employees to not have an increase in their pay. Now, in today's world, that may not be as unusual as it used to be, but I can tell you that we cannot maintain the quality employees we have in this city without paying them a market rate of pay. They have other options, and other cities would take them in a minute. So we can't refuse to pay our employees below market rate. And I just have a feeling with what's going on today, with police officers in our country and even in this state, I have a feeling that police officers are not going to continue to work for $40,000 or $45,000 a year. I know I surely would, with the danger that they face and how they're viewed in today's world. So we've got to look at that long term. So in summary, what we're doing tonight is we're proposing a minimal, and I know when it comes to taxes, nothing is minimal, so I probably should use that term. We're seeking a minimal property tax increase tonight to start to develop a long-term strategy to stabilize the city's finances. And the council is aware of the economic situation that most of our citizens are facing. Many of our council members are facing the same situation. So we've tried to be cognizant of the fact that the economics of our citizens are kind of stressful right now. And so that's why, as a council, when we looked at the shortfall in our budget and how we could fix that, we looked at setting the amount of the increase equal to what citizens had historically been paying in another fee in the city. And that's basically how we arrived at the $223,000, is to say we don't want to stress our citizens out. They were already paying that in a transportation utility fee earlier. And so we kind of looked at that as a wash, right or wrong, but looked at that as not putting additional stress on our citizens. And we also took some money out of the, Councilman Swanson will talk about that, out of the rainy day fund to make sure we had a balanced budget. But in my opinion, it's just my opinion, and it doesn't make it right or wrong. We cannot continue to get further behind in preparing for the capital projects. This is the city needs to support the growth that we're facing. And the further we get behind, the further we try to kick the can down the road, the more difficult it is to get caught up. And I don't want to be like one of our cities to the south, not too far here, that went to their citizens and imposed a 99.6% increase in taxes in 1 year. I just don't think we can do that. And if we continue to defer these projects that we know we have facing us and that need to be done, that's what's going to happen eventually. And it might not be, well, I'm the mayor or this council's in place, but someone will have to ask that if we don't start taking steps towards doing this. And your council looks at things in two aspects, needs and wants. And with the restrictions we have, we're concentrating on needs. Now, the definition of needs and wants is different by every individual. But when I run into 5 police officers getting ready to go out to duty, and they fear for their safety with what's going on because we have no protection in the way our police department is currently set up, I think that's a need. When they tell me that, Mayor, last night I arrested somebody with a DUI and we had to bring him over here for a blood draw, the whole time this guy's buddy just kept driving around the parking lot. I would ask that you put yourself in that position. And so this isn't a matter of, having a Taj Mahal or a right-sized facility. This is about safety of our officers. And, we need to look at those type of things in our city. So I understand this is a very emotional subject. Don't get me wrong. I received numerous communications, and amazingly enough, some very positive because they know how special a place this is. But as I told the reporter from the Standard Examiner, I really haven't received any thank you notes yet. So we understand this is emotional. And I just would encourage you tonight that we don't do away with the emotion. That's what makes life good, but that we really listen about the facts and we try to make our decisions and our input based upon the facts that will be presented this evening. And that's the purpose of us being here tonight. So I just wanted to give those few comments and let you know that we are concentrating on the long term. Frankly, this is my first experience in government, as many of you know. And I think it's dangerous to just look at things 1 year at a time, even though we have many uncertain times today. So with that, we'll just proceed along with our agenda. We'll go to our active agenda now, which we will start our public hearing for truth and taxation. And we'll begin by receiving comments on the proposed property tax rate increase. We have here, as I mentioned earlier, Evan Nelson. We also have here with us our county treasurer, are you? And we're going to fix that. See how easy it is to fix this? John said assessor up there. See how easy this is? And so we'll hear from John now. He's going to spend about 5 minutes just giving us a little bit of insight from his perspective on property taxes. John, thank you.
Bill.
Good evening. John Bottom, the Weber County Treasurer. I was asked by your city council to come tonight to spend 5 to 7 minutes and answer 3 questions. I'm not here to speak for or against the topic that's being discussed tonight, so I'm not here for that purpose at all. But rather, I was asked to answer 3 questions. They gave me three really good questions. I will try in 5 to 7 minutes to answer them. They are, how are home or property values calculated? Second question was, how's the certified tax rate calculated? And the third, what is the discount that property owners receive off the market value of their property? I'd like to start with the first one, value. In talking with John Muhleberry, who is the county assessor, he gave me the following answer, and I'd just like to very briefly read that and provide a couple of insights to that. He outlined that the Weber County assessor does not determine value. It's determined by the normal interactions between buyers and sellers. The Utah legislature has outlined that the county assessor shall gather market information and the value elements or characteristics of each property in the county. So why might your property value go up or down? It depends on what people are paying for houses in the neighborhood. If your value is going up, it means that the assessor's collected information saying that people have been willing to come into your neighborhood and buy houses like yours for more, and the value increases. So the assessor's role then is to track all of that activity. So as you see values going up, behind the scenes, you're probably saying people are buying homes and willing to pay more and more for those homes. And you probably have talked to people who have done that. That's the nature of value and how values are calculated. He's tracking the information and then putting it into the tax notice. So September 15th is an important date because if you feel that you disagree with the value that you got in your tax valuation notice you got a week ago, you need to appeal. And that's an important thing for all of you to do. So that would be an important date. Next question, how's the tax rate calculated? Let's start with the real basic. Every tax entity in the county, and I track about 10 entities in the county, they each have a budget. And they each have a geographical boundary where they're allowed to collect taxes within. So, for example, North Ogden can only collect taxes within the North Ogden boundary. And the North Ogden city then has a budget. So it's a simple formula. You take that budget, and let's pretend, for an example, that's $1 million. So if the budget is $1 million, you divide that number by the taxable value in that area. Let's pretend in this example that it's $1 billion. So if this math goes, then the budget is $1 million, and all the taxable value in the neighborhood is worth $1 billion. The tax rate equals 0.001. It's kind of like a teeter-totter, so I'm going to explain this real quickly. If the value in your neighborhood doubles from $1 billion to $2 billion, the tax rate then reduces. The purpose then is to collect the same amount of budget. So you get that budget number at the top that doesn't change, and it doesn't change except for new growth that you've got in the neighborhood, or if the city council and the mayor decide to bring a tax increase to you and present it to you. The budget does not change, but the state legislators allow that budget number to come and be the same from year to year. The legislators design the law that way. So the budget stays the same, but the value changes a little bit. I remember back in 2008-9, if you guys remember that, wow, what a roller coaster that was. And the values went down. Well, in order to get that same budget amount, the tax rate went up. So you got that teeter-totter effect. So basically the tax rate is a result of the budget being divided by the taxable value. So it could go up or down, but it goes up or down depending on basically what the value of the property in the neighborhood does. So there's the answer to that real briefly. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Third question is, what is the discount that property owners receive off the market value of their property? The legislature, again, designs all these laws from those that would send up Salt Lake and vote on this stuff. And they've said that commercial property for taxation purposes shall be taxed at 100% of the market value. So if you got a commercial piece of property worth $100,000, it will be taxed at that same value, $100,000. We've also said that there's a residential exception. So if you've got a house, then it will only be taxed at 55% of that market value. So the taxable value, as we call it, would be $55,000 if we use that same $100,000 example. So the commercial property taxed $100,000, taxed at the same rate, $100,000. A residential house would be taxed at 55% of that. There are other classifications. The next major one is farmland, and it's taxed at about 10%. So in that range. So instead of being at 100% or 55% like a residential property is, about 10%. I know I've gone through the answers pretty quick. I got 5 minutes, and I hope I got it all in there, but hopefully that makes sense a little bit. If you have questions about this or other taxing issues, as far as the property tax collection things, please give me a call. Weaver County Treasurer would be happy to talk with you. Send me an email, and be happy to help you with the questions you've got. And I wish you a good evening. Thank you.
John, appreciate your time. We'll let you know if we have any questions. Can you go back just a slide or two? We put this in here. This is a tax notice that you probably just recently received. This would show, I think the assessed value of this home was $312,000. As you can see there, the taxes in North Ogden, the portion paid to North Ogden, go up $31.23. Without that, this is very interesting. If not, last year this individual paid, I think, $186. If we do nothing, they pay $175 this year. That's the same with my tax bill. It's always puzzled me how the city can operate on less money each year from collecting taxes from the citizens. If you go to the next slide here, this just gives you an idea of where taxes go based upon the information just received from the county assessor. And you can see that the amount that goes to the city, the green portion, is about 10% of your tax bill. Of course, the major portion goes to the schools, and then of course to the county. So tonight, as we talk about taxes, as I mentioned earlier, the amount we're proposing would raise $223,000. We've taken approximately $360,000 out of the rainy day fund. And the rest we've cut expenses, I think, in the city about $680,000. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn the time over to Councilwoman Stoker. She's going to give us a presentation on taxes this evening. Did I misunderstand that? I didn't do this, by the way. This was John and Councilman Swanson that did that, Cheryl. I tried to fight it, honestly. All right, Councilman Swanson, would you help our citizens with some additional information before we ask them to come up and make some comments, please?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. And Cheryl, thanks for being a good sport. Well, that's an inside joke that someday we'll explain. Right, Cheryl? If I survive that long. So looking at this slide here, as we talk about the city's finances and the amount of property tax revenue that we have collected, if you look at this graph, the beginning point is 2009. That's the first property tax year after Northview Fire was taken out of our individual property taxes and created its own line item. So there's a separate, starting in that year, there's a separate line for the Northview Fire Department. So the amount of revenue that we collected that year was $876,000. The red line represents the purchasing power. So as we all know, there's inflation, right? Every year, the dollar that we have this year won't buy as much next year because of inflation. A dollar's worth of goods in 2009 is much more expensive than a dollar today. So what the red line represents is if we move to the $876,000 and we fast forward to 2019 and adjust for inflation, the city would need to collect $1,045,000 to have the same purchasing power. So in order to buy the things that we did and cover the services that we did in 2009, in today's dollars, it would be almost $1.1 million. If you look at 2019, the actual amount that we collected was $1.174 million, so just shy of 1.2. So you can see that we're ahead of inflation by about $130,000 over a 10-year period, which is pretty good. Just barely stay ahead of inflation. And then on top of that, you figure all of the growth, the additional roads and everything else that we have had come into the city over those 10 years. For us to be operating where we have is really a tribute to the past councils and more to the departments and our city staff and their ability to spend frugally. Next slide, John. Mayor talked earlier about the cost of public safety. If you go back to the far left there in 2000, you'll see that public safety had a budget of just over $1 million, and they spent less than that. If you look in fact at every year since the year 2000 for the last 19 years, our public safety department has come in under budget every year. And that's not because they have a padded budget to begin with. They run a pretty tight ship over there, and the councils past and councils current have not been sloppy with our tax dollars. We've had very frugal budgets, and the police department always manages to come in after we've cut a lot of things that they wanted for the year, and we've whittled down that budget to what we think is manageable. They manage to come in under budget, which is hats off to Chief Quinney and Chief Warren and Chief Polo, all the others that have been here for so long. Next slide, please. Mayor mentioned that our reliability, our reliance on funding is changing over time. If you look at the far left there, the year 2000, just over 40% of our total budget came from property taxes, with the more volatile sales tax and building permits accounting for roughly 60%. If you fast forward again to 2019, you'll see that that has dramatically changed, where building permits is pretty well held steady over time. You can certainly see the effects of the Great Recession in there, but building permits holds right around that 10% mark. What's markedly changed is our dependence on sales tax in order to fund general fund needs, the largest of which is our police department. And property taxes have gone from 40% of that down to significantly less, covering that. So with that, this year in property taxes, last year, excuse me, in 2019, we collected $1,174,000, as we mentioned a moment ago. The public safety budget, just to keep our 20 officers and our building and our staff to keep us safe here in the community, was $2.6 million. So our property taxes don't even cover half of what it costs out of the general fund for us to pay for our police department. And with the growth that we have, we need more officers. As we'll show here in just a minute, the police department was denied some needed expenditures this year because we just didn't have the budget for it. Next slide, please. Mayor mentioned some of the shorter term challenges that we have, the coronavirus. When we started the budgeting process in late December, early January, Corona hadn't hit. We'd heard about some bug going around in China, but it hadn't hit with the force that it would, and nobody anticipated it coming in the way it did. So as we kept going through the budgeting process and Corona hit, and sales tax projections were modified by the economists, we realized that we were projected to be about $630,000 less than the 2020 budget. That's a pretty big chunk of drop there. As Mary mentioned, there's so much uncertainty. And to this point in the year, sales tax seems to be holding pretty well. We just don't know what's around the corner. So we're trying to plan and be as prepared for what the future brings as we possibly can. Next slide, please. So in consultation, the mayor and council agreed upon a threefold strategy for short and long-term challenges to be addressed. The first was to reduce proposed expenditures that $649,000, use of rainy day funds to the tune of $360,000, and then this uncomfortable but necessary property tax increase of $223,000. The strategy, as Mayor mentioned earlier, to address our immediate short-term needs that have arisen because of the economic impact of the coronavirus, but also to start addressing long-term needs and deficiencies that have crept into our budgeting habits over the years. As the economy recovers, property taxes will increase and will continue to further help along those long-term issues that we were facing. Excellent. So what kinds of reductions in expenditures did we see? We're going to go through several departments here. So in coming up with that large amount taken out of the budget through our departments, in administration, we eliminated merit increases. There are no raises for our employees this year. Council reduced its stipend by 50%. Not listed on here, but I think equally important is the mayor reduced his stipend by 100% to contribute. Those two alone contributed about $30,000 to the budget. Leave payout. Many of our employees over the years have enjoyed the benefit of being able to cash in at the end of the year some of their excess time off, their PTO. And they use that to fund their Christmas for their kids and to maybe have a little vacation. We've eliminated that budget this year because it does provide a significant expense for the city. So we have eliminated leave payout. We've eliminated training almost completely, mainly because of the travel that's necessary and the expense associated with that travel in order to provide that training. We eliminated one part-time proposed position and eliminated moving one part-time position to a full-time position. So essentially a full-time employee there that has been eliminated. We had planned to do a citizen survey through one of the large survey companies that would have had a cost of about $13,000 to $14,000 to get a scientific idea of where the residents feel about certain things. We've eliminated that, not because we don't want your feedback. We just can't justify spending the money right now. We're trying to cut everything that we possibly can. Economic development, public relations, building maintenance, all have been reduced down to the bare bones. Building maintenance, we don't want you to think that we're not maintaining our buildings. But what we have done is where, okay, the paint on that building is good enough for now. It really should be repainted, but it doesn't have to be this year. We've put that off and similar projects throughout the city. Next slide. This is in our public safety department. We've eliminated 2 new officers. Chief, you wanted 4 officers, correct? You wanted 2, and we eliminated both of them. We eliminated 2 new police vehicles. Those 2 items alone, each officer is about $125,000 to bring on, train, and properly equip. The vehicles are about $44,000 a piece. So we're looking at about $169,000 per officer that will not be spent this year in an effort to reduce our budgets. Merit increases have been eliminated. The leave payout plan that we talked about unnecessary equipment maintenance that can be pushed back has been so. The proposal to move our code enforcement position to full-time has been eliminated. We're leaving that at a part-time position. We get a lot of calls from folks throughout the city about code violations. We've got weeds that are 5 feet tall next to my fence. We have somebody that's, draining the oil in their front yard out of their car. There's just code violation after code violation. And we have more than enough for a full-time officer to follow up on. But for now, we're going to do the best we can for the part-time officer. And additional training that is not necessary for the officers to retain their certification. All of their certification training, their firearms training, things like that are necessary will continue to occur. Next slide, please. Planning and building inspection, again, merit increases, leave payout. We reduce office supply orders to the very minimum that we can get away with and still have the department function as it should and provide the services that we expect as citizens. Small equipment that isn't an absolute have to, we're going to die without it this year. If it could in any way be put off, then we have done that. Contracted plan review and inspections, we have eliminated much of the contracting that we do with outside entities to try to help cover some of the plan inspections, reviews that are done as new developments and housing is brought in, and again, training. Next slide, public works. Merit increases, leave payout. Computer services, again, we're keeping what we have up and running, but we're not adding, and we're not replacing where it's not necessary. Street maintenance, with the reduction in our Class B and C road funds that come from gas tax, there's been a pretty significant reduction there. And that means that street maintenance will also be reduced in order to match that reduction in funds. That means less of the crack sealing that we do with our own crack sealing machine. It means less overlays. It means less chip sealing, which, everybody celebrates when we don't have to do chip sealing, right? We all save a windshield when we do that. But, so all of those kinds of things, parking lot maintenance, street painting supplies, unless it's an absolute immediate safety need, we are not going to be restriping in places where it will suffice until next year or perhaps the year after. A much needed new copy machine has been eliminated this year, again, reducing office supplies and training, except for our water and sewer employees that have certain certifications that they have to keep in order to work on our chlorinization of our water and keep our sewer running and everything like that. Those have to be maintained and those will be continued. Next slide. Parks and Recreation. They have eliminated a ton. Merit increases, leave payout, training, equipment maintenance and replacement, department supplies. The very difficult decision to not hold cherry days this year. It was hard. That's a long-standing tradition. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we couldn't ensure the safety of the public in the way that we should, and it also was a budgetary decision to save the tens of thousands of dollars that come. John, can you remind me what we normally spend on fireworks?
25, 26.
25,000 on fireworks alone is typically what we spend in a given year. Community programs that we felt were not necessary have been eliminated. Building maintenance, our parks are usually fertilized twice a year. This year we're fertilizing only once, so we're cutting that expense in half. Our parks are going to be able to survive that for a year, long term. It's something that we have to go back to doing it twice a year in order to maintain our parks the way that we expect them to be. Trail light maintenance, playground maintenance, Christmas decorations, volunteer projects, amphitheater programs sponsored by the city, the community garden, immediately necessary pool maintenance. All of those things have been cut back so that we can squeeze every penny that we can out of our departments in order to manage this deficit as best we can. So the next portion of our strategy was to dip into our rainy day funds. This year we're doing that to the tune of $360,000. The interesting thing about rainy day funds, I mentioned earlier how the police department is under budget every year. So is our water department, and so is the sewer, so is the parks. Every year, regardless of how tight we are with the budget, our departments manage to come in under budget. And that additional savings is then set aside for this kind of a situation where we find ourselves in a very rainy day, in a very unique situation, where we can dip into those savings. Unlike other cities that aren't that frugal, aren't that conservative, and don't have those funds like we do to dip into. The last statement there, go back one, John. Thank you. It's important to remember that rainy day funds are just that, they're rainy day funds. They're generally used to fund capital projects, large projects and purchases that other cities might use other means to pay for. They should not be used except in exceptional situations for operational costs. This year, to the tune of $360,000, they'll be used for operational costs. Next slide, please. So the property tax increase. Copy of the proposed tax increase there on the right. A home taxable, a home of a value of $329,000 would increase from $181.31 to $213.52, $32.21. The North Ogden tax on a business of $329,000 will go from $329 to $388, and the proposed tax increase is 17.73%. A couple of interesting statistics that I want to share with you very quickly. I didn't have these made into a slide, but our home values in 2010, the typical home, the median home price in North Ogden was $194,000. That's in 2010. Any guesses on what it is today? $339. Somebody's been cheating. That's as of December 31st. As of today, well, actually yesterday, about 4/23. What do you think it is? It's increased further to $350,000. So in 10 years, the median house price in North Ogden has risen 80%. Now that's in real raw dollars. When we adjust for inflation, it went from, where's my number here? So in 2010, that 194 would equal $227,000 in 2019 dollars. So essentially, in today's dollars, from $219,000 to $350,000. Okay, that's a 47% increase. Adjusting for inflation, what have our property taxes done? Our property tax revenue. Any guesses? What's the percentage increase? Bear in mind, homes have gone up, inflation adjusted, 47%. Inflation adjusted, how much is our property tax gone up?
In the city?
In the city, as a percentage. Okay.
Mine went up 17%, 2009.
The revenues that we've collected as a whole as a city has gone up 8.8%. From 2010, adjusted for inflation, to 2019. So while our home values have skyrocketed, the amount that we're collecting in property taxes has not. And again, my hat's off, not to pat myself on the back, but fellow council members, previous mayors and councils have done an amazing job of continuing to run our city as we could have really had a whole lot more money coming in, but they wisely didn't because we didn't need it. and that's where we are today. So with that, Mayor, I will turn it back over to Cheryl, is that correct?
I think I'll take it for.
Okay. Turn the time back
She
over.
lives close to me, and I don't want to get the ramifications. My place. I would just say one thing, and as I said earlier, I admire the council for doing that. But I would challenge the fact that that costs us long term. Because now we're facing the situation today with the commitments we've got, with revenue dollars not to meet it. And so I just want to point out that I've asked Councilman Swanson, each council member has an assignment. Councilman Swanson has taken the assignment of finances, dealing with that. But they did do a good job, year to year. Now we've got to look out further than that. John, could you just go back real quickly to the property tax valuation? I just want to reemphasize this. You heard Councilman Swanson talk about the increased costs that we're facing. It's like we already know, nothing seems to be cheaper. So I just have this, keep having this question in my mind. If you look at this, and this is very small print, I believe that in 2019, this tax the citizen paid to the city of North Ogden $185. If we do nothing, it'll be $175 to the city. So even with the growth we're experiencing, we don't have the funds to keep up with our police department. As you heard, Councilman Swanson, the new officer equipped vehicle, et cetera, is about over 100,000, with training 125,000. I like to use round numbers. We have an officer now for, basically rounding, one officer for every 1,000 people in the city, which, by the way, is about half of the national average. We hope to maintain that one officer per 1,000. So if we build 250 homes in this city with 4 residents per home, which wouldn't be unusual, we now have 1,000 residents. We would collect $50,000 in property tax on building 250 homes. Less than 1/2 of an officer's investment. And I can just tell you, as the city grows, particularly with higher density housing, we have the probability of seeing more crime. That's just how it is. The more people you get in the city, the more crime you have the potential to have. So I want you to keep that in mind of how we fund the city when a good majority, mine included, my house, I think I went from $281 last year down to $257. Now, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. I happen to be a CPA, but that formula doesn't work long term, particularly when the city's growing, the degree it's growing. I just want to point out one other thing before we enter into the public hearing portion of our meeting tonight. And you still have a very conservative council and mayor. And they are concerned about each one of the citizens. That's why additionally this year, there are no increases in your utility bills for the first time in many, many years. Because we're cognizant of the fact that citizens are having some distress in their economics. So no utility bill increases this year. So we still have a conservative council, even a conservative mayor to go along with that. So now we will enter into the public hearing portion of our meeting. What we would ask is that those who want to make comments, John, what microphone will they be using?
Bring it there.
This.
We ask you to come up and make your comments. Once again, we won't be answering your questions directly this evening, but we will answer them. Line up over this way if you like, and we'd ask that you still employ social distancing, which is, I guess, been defined as 6 feet. Probably anybody's best guess, I think that's not. We'd ask you to please state your name, full name, and your address. Please speak into the microphone, and each individual will be limited to 5 minutes this evening, so that we have adequate time for everybody to speak. And as I mentioned before, questions will be noted, and responses will be given after the hearing. Perhaps what we can do is start this evening with those that are present here. And then John, that'll give people time to raise their hand, and you can monitor that, whether it's through a chat or to raise your hand. So with that, we invite those who would like to make a comment this evening or have any suggestions on giving us counsel on how we can solve the situation we're faced with, thinking of the long-term ramification. We would ask you to, even if you don't think of the long-term ramification, come up and make a comment and help us solve this problem. So with that, we invite anybody who would like to make a comment to come up to the microphone. Once again, just to remind you to state your name and your address.
My name is Alan Giles. I live at 676 East, 3050 North. And I had 3 questions. In your budgeting for the departments, do they do or employ zero-based budgeting each year? Or do the budgets start at last year's amount and then deal with increases? I would hope that they do zero-based budgeting where they justify their budgets each year. The second question has to do with considerations. What considerations did you do for the number of people in the population who are on fixed incomes? Those people primarily would be retired persons, but there may be others who are on fixed income and see no increase in salary or income from any source. The third question has to do with the slide that you showed about the projections that you did, and you showed the base of income from property tax, then income from sales tax, and then your building permits. The mayor, if I remember correctly, you said that you had realized no actual decrease in sales tax. Did you, in fact, adjust your consideration for property tax increase because the actuals are different than the forecast that you started with at the first of the year? I appreciate you taking my questions. Being an elected representative is a thankless job. So thanks to all of you for your time and energy, but please understand the need for a question. Thank you.
I always think Mr. Giles' voice is cool to listen to. And to you, council representatives and mayor, I really appreciate the example. I will give you my name and address. But I still have to thank you. You're leading out with an example by showing some sacrifices in the personal. And if you haven't heard, thanks yet. Thank you. My name is Justin Cook. I live at 1350 East, 2600 North. Is that good? Okay, so a couple questions. It sounds like growth is really expensive for North Ogden. And I don't see the reason why we're allowing growth if it's costing us, those who already live here, so much, when maybe the burden should be placed on those who wish to move here. I don't know what the ramifications are, but it would be really nice for them that wish to move here to pay the burden of moving here instead of all of the original residents. If it's something so highly sought after, then perhaps we need to put a premium on it, and instead of us having to pay for that. I hope that can be answered, because it sounds like we are paying a premium to allow people to move here. The second question I had was, it sounded to me from Mr. Bond that we have a budget, and that based on that budget, our tax rates from property taxes respond accordingly. Such that if my home value goes up and the budget didn't change, the rate goes down because the value went up, but the budget didn't change. So how come if our values keep going up, we're all of a sudden out of money? It seems to me that the budget got behind and we're not catching up. I don't know how that works, but it'd be nice to have those details explained. And I have one more question. Last question. Yes, I agree with Mr. Giles. This is a toughie, and I don't have an answer, but I do have some concerns. For those who are watching their home values go up and they've been in that home for a long time, they tend to be individuals that are on fixed income. They seem to suffer the most when their property values go up because they are at the mercy of something they don't get the benefit from unless they sell. And I think they may have proven that they want to be here. And so it tends to be like a catch-22. I'm worried we're not addressing that. That's it. That's my questions.
I'm Keith Folger, 497 East, 3525 North. And I want to tag along with Alan and the previous speaker with regard to people on fixed incomes. And the mayor said he hopes we can hone in on facts. And so I just want to highlight my concern with a few of the facts. In my personal situation, like I said, when I said 17% raise in my property tax, North Ogden property tax, that was for 10 years, not for 5. For 5 years, my property tax in North Ogden went up 5.5%. Now, North Ogden property tax gets folded into the county property taxes. And in the last 5 years, my Weber County property tax has increased 27%. And I would tell you that my adjusted gross household income increased 5%. And I'm sure that I'm somewhat typical of people on fixed incomes. So while it really is a dilemma that you face, all of you on the council and the mayor, I thank you for the work that you do to try and minimize the impact. But the other statistic that I think is relevant in this discussion is that, and this is for wage earning people, the U.S. Census Bureau data for Weber County, data that I looked at didn't go below the county, shows the median household income increased 13% in 5 years from 2014 to 2018. So even for working people, the median household income is not even keeping up with the Weber County tax increases, of which North Ogden was part of that. So all that does is make your job much harder, I know. But boy, I think you have to be sensitive to that, because we really have a large number of retired people in this community on fixed incomes. And so with that, I just throw those statistics at you and wish you continued good luck in solving the problem. And, again, thank you for your work and effort all of you on the council. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. My name's Dan Farron, 3011 North, 1050 East. And I just looked at my evaluation and it's an increase of $57. So we're looking at another 32 on top of that that's already been proposed. Okay. Well, Mary, you're fond of saying revenue pays expenses. My question is, why can't we increase our revenue through other sources besides property taxes? Some other way that can be done to help us is fixed income people. So we can have, I know it's going to be tough with this COVID mess, with what's going on in economics here. I realize I can see this as a, hopefully a short-term situation. But I know I've been here since '87. Taxes kept going up every year, and they still do. By the way, we're number 2 in the state, 0.78%. Whereas Salt Lake's 0.71. The only one that's higher is San Juan County at 0.95. So why do we have to be number 2 in taxation? So I'm really hoping that we can find a way to increase the income of our community without having to dip into the property tax at every turn and just see it continue to grow. Even with this disaster, and we're also talking about public safety. I talked to Cheryl about that earlier, folks, and we got this public safety bond that you're proposing or looking at. I'm sure that's going to be talked about earlier or later, but it's 11 million at this point. You're going to fund that with a 30-year bond, 25 to 30 years. It's $600,000 per year. That is a substantial increase. Why not do a phased-in approach? Let's say that 11 million and bring it down like they did to the public works building. 2.2 million first year, second year maybe 1.8. I think it was up 4 something. I know why we can't phase this in. I know we need it. I'm just saying, I hope we're looking at all those possibilities, and we'd like to hear about that later. So I guess that's my question. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
I'm Paul Mack, the 730 East 1750 North. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and still gathering information. Appreciate the education for the various presentations, and it's very compelling. It seems like there's a unified consensus to moderate, careful, and controlled in our spending, and I appreciate that. So thank you for your services. I want to ask a couple of questions that maybe you could address afterwards, but if we have 250 new homes, is that probably realistic? 200, 300, 250 new homes. We just built a home. My daughter and our side pastor went through the development process, and the building permit, if I'm not mistaken, was between 19 and 21,000. Is that correct, Candace?
About 18. So
18,500. If you multiply 250 building permits times 19,000, that would be 4.75 million, 4,750,000. Is that off base or is that accurate? Is it pretty close? 250 homes at 19,000 is 4,750,000. And if I understand you correctly, Mayor, that would increase our property tax revenue in the city by that increment of growth by about 50,000 per year. My experience in development is that when a new development comes in, the infrastructure costs of engineering, roads, curb and gutter, all the utilities are paid for by the developer or the homeowner. Justin, just so that you understand that, that's a pretty significant chunk of budget money. If I'm off base, please correct me, but it seems like the incoming citizens, the younger families, the young couples with young families, or maybe even migrating from California, from Salt Lake, if they buy a new home, there's usually an infrastructure cost that is borne. The maintenance cost is carried by the city into the future through resurfacing, chipping, repairing sidewalks, so forth. So there's legitimate maintenance costs in replacing infrastructure lines. So there's significant ongoing maintenance costs. If I'm not mistaken, that is, from an accounting standpoint, treated as an asset that the city receives as a result of that development. So there's really very little upfront cost except for the plan check fees, the inspection process, and then eventual upgrades of wells or whatever. So I think that is a proper role of government, have a long-term vision, which I think you've emphasized, that there has been a degree of inheritance from past practices. So if I understand the proper role of government, I think to defend against injustice is the primary role, which welcomes the police department. They protect against crime and violence and even just the disorderly conduct in the community. What if the police department were increasing their funding and an increased emphasis were placed on personnel and possibly a decreased emphasis on facility? I wonder if the police chief could address that and their feelings regarding the safe or unsafe nature of our current facilities and structures with 20 officers, and your example of, the drunken buddy circling the building and how he felt unsafe, or why was that? I'm just kind of confused a little bit. Maybe you can elaborate on that, because I really think, from my perspective as a citizen, we do not want to weaken law and order and a protection against injustice, which is the next thing that leads to domestic tranquility. We have the right of common defense. We as agents, as citizens, expect that. So we believe that you are doing your job when you're strengthening the police force. And so I get a feeling that you're really being moderate and careful and unified in what you proposed. I also wondered in the presentation, because it was very compelling, you proposed that the departments almost generally proposed more than what you accepted. So there was reductions in a multitude of areas. Could you provide information of what the requests, the proposed requests were relative to last year's actual expenditures? Then how did that compare to what was actually granted? If I'm a negotiator, I've had some experience with that, I don't ask for what I want the first time. I ask more than what I want, expecting a reduction. So I'd like to see the zero-based budget or whatever approach, and just maybe get more and more education. But generally, my sense is that you're being very good in a tough time. You're working together, hard decisions to be made. The other note, I'll close with this. Could we also find out what activities are long-term revenue consumption programs? We have things that may be a little more discretionary. You mentioned the flowers. Maybe you could elaborate what the RDA fund is. I think it might be good for the citizens to know. The amphitheater, the swimming pool, recreation, maybe just list those things that are senior center, they're historical, they're relevant, they're good in a lot of ways. What does that represent in terms of infrastructure, support costs, maintenance costs, personnel costs, budgeting costs, and things of that nature? It would be helpful. I haven't attended very many meetings. I've been a little bit negligent, but I'm grateful for this opportunity tonight. I appreciate all you're doing, and just anything you can do to maintain a conservative, ongoing approach, strengthen our police force, maybe prioritize more on personnel. Let's attract the very best. Maybe be a little bit more guarded on our facility expansion unless there's true safety issues. Thank you.
Dave Hume, 513 East, 1700 North. Thanks for all your time in this. I know it's a lot of work. My first question is whether or not an elected official who does not currently reside within the North Ogden boundaries is subject to the tax increase that's being proposed, and whether or not such an individual in that hypothetical situation would be required to recuse themselves, or if they would just do it out of a general sense of duty. Second thing is that I added on to my house, and my tax bill is about triple this year. I haven't had a pay raise in a few years, so I guess maybe I'm on a fixed income too, but that's not hard to stomach, to be honest, to triple my property tax bill when I know that it's funding the police department, because my home's worth more money, and so I appreciate that I need to pay more to keep my higher property value safe. But when the property taxes go for other things, I'm not using the park 3 times as much, I'm not using the roads 3 times as much, I'm not using the pool 3 times as much, or the amphitheater, or any of those other things. So it is definitely harder to stomach any sort of tax increase when those funds continue to be used for those types of purposes. And in 2008 and 2009, I stood in front of the city council and I talked about how they had significantly decreased their expenses in reaction to the recession. And I said, please, when this is over, don't go back. On the things that you cut, like the police cars and everything, please go back. But, you know, as I've watched over the years, and again, I mean, I recognize the diligence of the council and the mayor, and that they've done a pretty good job, but things just creep in, and they start to become the new normal. We have this many parks, we have a pool, we have an amphitheater, these are the new normal. So when you look at cutting costs, I would suggest that you look at asking yourself where we were 12 years ago, what we didn't have, and maybe don't have it anymore. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but you know, for instance, if the pool is losing money from an operational standpoint, as opposed to losing money when paying back the bond, which I think is definitely true. If it's not cost effective to operate, then maybe it doesn't get operated. You can try and raise fees, and if people can't bear them, it's the maximum. You know, when you try and put the number of people that'll go in and how much they'll pay, doesn't reach the operating cost. So maybe it doesn't need to be operated until you can find a way to make it profitable. Because if that's losing money and I'm paying extra property taxes for that, you know, as a business person, yeah, that bothers me. So I hope that you'll look into some of those things, and that you know, write yourselves a note, open it again in 5 years and say, oh yeah, remember back then when I said that I wasn't going to do anything when the money actually started coming back in, and I held to that. Because I think really that is the thing. You know, you sit up there and you know, I sat there and I voted for things that I look back and said I shouldn't have voted for that. And but it's so easy to do. You have the power. Ultimately, property taxes are enforced at the point of a gun, and you know, that's what you have to think about when you're raising property taxes. Am I really willing to kick somebody out of their house because they're refusing to pay what I'm doing? And it's a very somber thing. And I know that you take it very seriously, but I just sort of wanted to throw that perspective out there. Thanks again for all your time and all that you did on this. Let me mention one more thing real quick. I was at the dedication of the Gold Star Memorial on Saturday. I believe the mayor said something to the effect that all the city did was to say, yeah, you can put that there. If that's the case, if I have that right, I love that. That is the model for proper government for me. Private citizens went out to members of the city and said, we need money to build this because this is
something that is meaningful to us, and we hope that it's meaningful to you. And private citizens did that, and that is why we have that. And an incredible amount of good can be done when you're willing to ask instead of force people. And that will stand as a testament to that for a lot of years, and I'm really grateful for that approach, so thank you.
My name is Margene Swanson, 857 East, 3250 North. I never get up at meetings and say anything. I usually don't come. I watch online. I just wanted to thank the council for being so careful with our money, all of our money. I don't mind paying an extra $30, $50, $100 a year to maintain the beautiful city that I moved to 15 years ago that had a pool at the time, had parks at the time. We moved here because it was a beautiful bedroom community. Since we have moved here, and I have been involved, maybe not in front of you, but involved in the community, I know that many people do not want to have more industry move in, do not want to have more businesses move in. They like the bedroom community. Well, if you really like the bedroom community, then you have to pay up, and you have to pay a little bit more to keep it the nice, cozy place that we all love. We love our parks, we love our pool, we love all these nice amenities. It makes our community a beautiful place. So if you live here and you moved here, if you have lived here for 100 years, then I get it. I get where you're not happy about paying a little bit more, but $30 I think is for the city. City doesn't charge that much. It's the other things on the tax bill. My second concern is the employees of the city. It is much, much, much more expensive to lose great employees and have to hire new employees. Please, please, please continue to treat our wonderful city employees well. They're giving up a lot right now, and I remember in the recession that you mentioned earlier, they also gave up a lot, and when that recession was over, they were rewarded for their loyalty. I hope that they are treated well now so that they will be able to be rewarded for their loyalty of staying at this difficult time, because it is upstream thinking to be good to your employees so that you can keep running a great city. Thank you.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I again would echo the appreciation to the council for this. Some of the questions brought up by the gentleman a couple times ago, of all the things that need to be checked. I happen to know that you spend a lot of time checking those very same facts and figures, so it's been a long process to get to this point. One question I had though is, and I listened to the mayor talk about trading the $3 for utilities for the property tax, and there's probably a good answer to it, but I'm asking the question is, that's about a 4% decrease in the utility. How does that translate into an 18% property tax increase? It seems like maybe Ogden has an answer to that, but it seems like that's not equal. That being said, I agree with Marjorie Swanson's comments there. I think as a city we need to maintain what we all love, and if we don't pay for it, we cannot do that. I just would like to see more reasonable increases each year. If we had a 3 or 4% increase in property tax each year, I think people would be much more understanding than an 18% increase. The county really did even worse than that. And it just seems like either our leaders are not paying attention during the off years, or they're being way too exorbitant when they do ask for it. But to have to come and ask for huge amounts in percent increase, myself, I can understand the continuous every year. My costs go up everywhere else. I can understand the city government's cost would go up if we had an increase each year. That being said, again, I agree with the comments of Marjorie, and I think if we're going to maintain the kind of city that we love and that others admire in us, that we are going to have to pay for this, and because of that, I would support your proposal.
Thank you, John. Do we have some comments from those that are with us virtually?
Yes, let me steal the microphone and see if we can make this work. So we have one from Blake and Joanne. They didn't give a last name, but I think they can do that during their comments.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Joanne Minardi and Blake Minardi, and we live at 2915 North, 150 West. And this is the first time participating in the North Ogden Council. Thank you for your time and your effort. We appreciate the fact that you've spent a lot of hard work trying to put together information to help us understand the points behind this increase and the reasons for the increase. I have a couple of comments based upon the chart that's the sales revenue, the chart that you're using to promote the idea that our property taxes are not going to be enough to make up a shortfall, if I understood the chart correctly, the shortfall between the sales taxes that have been making up the primary percentages of our revenue for the city. As I understand it, when that decision was made to increase our property taxes, it was based on a presumption that the sales tax was going to decline. And actually, as the gentleman said before as well, that has not come to fruition. The sales tax has not declined. As a matter of fact, because of COVID. Most of us know everybody's staying home, people are working from home, which means that you're now cooking more meals at home, which means you're going to the grocery store more often. And instead of going and visiting friends next door that you can't play with anymore, people are taking rides. They're going out, they're traveling, they're buying gas. That's all the sales revenue. In addition to that particular piece of it, you have, as I understand it, you were talking about 200 more homes in the area will generate 50,000 worth of property taxes. Well, I don't know how many homes they're building down between 1700 and 2022, but there's more than 200 excuse me, down there. And then you've got, I don't know how many older 55 plus community homes being built off of Pleasant View Drive. And then you've got a new subdivision being built off of Ben Lomond Drive or Lomond View Drive. And then you have multi-million-dollar homes being built up on the east side. They're like 700 to 800,000 to $1 million homes. The community homes are like 400,000 to 450. I'm not sure how much the townhomes are running right now between, I would say probably at least 300,000. That's sort of the going rate right now. So I'm curious as to whether or not you've taken into account when you're looking at this budget, the number of increased homes and all the individuals that will now be spending money in our community, which in the next foreseeable year could be quite a large jump in our sales tax revenue. Then you also have the jump in the property tax revenue. So I didn't hear anything in in the presentation about how COVID is in fact enhancing the local community sales tax revenue because people are staying home. They're not they're not going on trips, they're not going out of town, they're doing things with their family, or they're buying stuff in their yard. We have, I don't know, a couple new takeout restaurants. We have a couple of, coffee shops, a couple of new coffee shops, Ace Hardware, gardener shops. So I understand and totally appreciate the need to have an increase where a need is required. I understand that we have a long-term goal that has to be met. I totally understand that 100%. Capital improvements. We live in a beautiful town. We all moved here because we love this. We love this city. We love our neighbors. We love the community. It's just a wonderful place to raise family. So, and we love our police force. I mean, you have to have a good police force. So as I understand it, the 233,000 that was being, that we were paying for the $3 fee that is now rescinded due to a legal decision, came back to us. So what your rationale, if I'm hearing it correctly, is that the $3 that's coming back to us because of that fee, you're now saying, hey, we're going to take that back from you during this time when people are not getting raises. So a lot of folks are out of work and receiving unemployment, and those unemployments are going down. So I guess I'm just curious as to where that 233,000 that we originally were paying for, what did you use that money for at that point? And are you going to use the money that you're requesting to generate this new 233,000 for the same things that it was being used for before? So I guess that's a couple of 2 or 3 questions all rolled into one. I think that's pretty much, I'm sure my time's getting close to being up, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about these thoughts. I think 17, I mean, our taxes here have gone up almost $300, $400 just in the past 3 or 4 years. And I know it's because the market value has gone up. We went from 1943.57 in total property taxes in 2018 to, if this new tax comes in, you're looking at 21.16. So I don't mind paying for taxes to live in a beautiful state. I just would like to make sure that we're looking at all of the extra revenue and all the extra service revenue that needs to be generated, and whether 17% can be reduced, especially for those that are on fixed incomes. So I think 17% might be a little high for them, and I certainly do not want them to have to suffer by not paying for medicine or milk or whatever, because 17% might be too high for them. I mean, my husband works for the state and he didn't get a raise this year. It's not going to hurt us. It's not going to kill us. But, somebody who hasn't received a raise in 3 or 4 years, it might hurt them. But again, I thank you for the time and appreciate everything that you do. And we absolutely love living in North Ogden. Thank you.
So Mayor, that was the only hand on Zoom. We do have a written comment, or 2 written comments, if you want me to read those. The first one is from Randolph Shaner at 531 East, 2550 North. His comment is, to start out with, your timing is terrible. Raising taxes affects the elderly who are on fixed income. Just because the value of a home increases doesn't mean that the owner can pay the taxes of that increased valuation. Our community is growing. Why aren't the developers being charged a sufficient amount that the rest of the community to pay for that development and other associated improvements needs because of increased population? If sales tax have continued strong and we have the same property tax, where is the budget shortfall coming from? And the next comment is from John Arrington. And it says, It's my understanding that the budget for the city is supposed to balance, yet as I review the budget to be presented, there are several funds that do not. General funds has an excess revenue of $45,844. Could this have reduced the amount needed from taxation? Enterprise funds, should these budgeted as increased retained earnings or some other identifiable expenditure? The Aquatic Center has an excess revenue of $2,939. Water fund an excess revenue of $763,354. Sewer fund an excess revenue of $119,671. Storm sewer fund an excess revenue of $3,245,262, and the solid waste an excess revenue of $87,230. And those are all the comments online there.
Okay, thank you, John. Does anyone else have a comment here? I'm going to get myself in trouble here with Councilman Swanson, but I'm going to take a minute and just answer some of the questions. General, and we will still follow up with these. Mr. Mackley, I had Evan give you the number we collected in building permits. You're right, and just to expand on this a little bit, we collect impact fees, and frankly, I believe we have some of the highest impact fees in the state that we collect when development is done, which makes it very expensive, frankly, in our city. So we kept the impact fees that have to be used for certain purposes, which are basically capital type projects. In building fees, last year we collected $391,000. The rest of impact fees to be used for parks, and I would just remind you that we are over $3 million in the hole on park impact fees. And as the city grows, we need more reservoirs, et cetera. So I just want to let you know, in building fees, that's what we collected. Brad, you asked a question of how utilities can go down 3 or 4%, property taxes go up 17%. First of all, an average utility bill in the city is $840. People are paying a little over $70 a month on average. So you'd be paying utility fees of $840 versus property tax of $200, $250 on the average. So the percentage is greater because you're only paying $200 in property taxes and $800 in utility fees. I agree that it's better to have a 3 or 4% increase if you need it, other than 17. And plus, the council, and I'm not being critical in any way because they were very cognizant of what was going on. So what happened is property values went up, the tax rate was lowered to collect approximately the same amount of money while costs were rising. So, like I said at the start, I don't think we've had a truth of taxation hearing in 17 years. So this has accumulated, the need has accumulated a little bit over time. We are very cognizant that many people are on fixed incomes. In fact, I'll be one of them soon, as I face retirement. And we had that discussion. We've talked about that because we're very aware of that fact. And that's why we limited it to the $233,000 because it was somewhat of an offset. And on top of that, because of the fixed income situation, no increase in utility bills, like I mentioned, because we were cognizant of that. And historically, you know, we've had substantial increases in those. So even if our property tax, our sales tax stays the same, which I still think there's a significant amount of uncertainty, and I don't want to be one to tell the citizens we can only plow your road every other day when it snows because of the uncertainty. Because frankly, if sales tax remains the same, I would remind you, we have still taken $360,000 out of the rainy day fund. And I believe that eventually needs to be restored over time. And we've had some question, I think it was $3 that was collected in the transportation utility fee. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think we only spent about $50,000 of that. The rest is being saved for the widening project down here at 2600 and Washington Boulevard, and the widening going up 450. We plan to use the money for that. However, with the uncertainty of its legality, we don't feel like it'd be wise to spend that and have to return it at some future date. So the $223,000 we were talking about, that was, I don't want to use it as an offset, but that's how we looked at the amount. Could surely be used for road repairs, and I would remind you, once again, I'll rely on Evan. We cut back road repairs, I think, to $300,000 this year. We eliminated $200,000 in road repairs. So you can see, even if sales tax comes in, we have a use for that, in addition to the other things we've talked about going forward. Now you agree with Paul that the first investment needs to be in our intellectual capital, which are our employees, team members. But I'd also say that if this city continues to grow, and we've got a great police chief, but sometimes you can't ask the impossible. And I would be very surprised if we could maintain one officer per 1,000 people. Let's say that even goes to 1.4 officers as we build this city out. We would need 56 officers in the city to probably maintain the level of safety we have today. Now, we can kick the can down the road. Somebody said, are we going to talk about the public safety building? Really, we're not tonight, because this is a separate issue. But we can continue to try to make do, which we've done for a number of years, and I think that's surely a philosophy I try to follow in my own. But at some point in time, it's going to catch up with us. And I don't want to come back. I'd probably be subsequent to my service as mayor and ask for some large increase of 99%. Kaysville City did that just, I think, 2 years ago. And I think Randy had a good point there. Not that we want to take money that we don't need. That's not the type of council we have. But then somebody made a comment. The last information I saw is that we're the third largest city in Weber County, but we have the 6th highest rate of collection of sales tax. Of property tax. So here we are, the third largest city, and we're number 6, I think, in property tax collection dollars. And then someone asked, referred to how much their taxes have gone up, and I would just refer once again to what Councilman Swanson talked about. And we surely aren't trying to dump on our fellow commissioners or anything, but I think you mentioned 27% taxes have gone up. So when you look at your whole tax bill, you're probably seeing that, but if you just look at the amount on North Ogden City, you see something different. Mr. Arrington talked about excess collections in what we call enterprise funds, which are water, sewer, garbage, storm sewer. Those are self-supporting funds. And I think there's a prohibition of taking money from those funds and giving it to the general fund. Evan? Yeah, and we're not used to, because we don't have to hold a truth in taxation hearing to increase the fee. We just do it in the budget process. So if that was the case, the easy thing for us to do would just keep increasing fees and then figure a way to get it over into the general fund. But we made a commitment to use our citizens that we're going to be totally transparent. And our council takes that seriously. So we'd rather do it this way in a truth in taxation hearing, because it either comes out of your left pocket or your right pocket. So I want you to know, we have not ignored the fact that we have numerous citizens on fixed incomes in our city. I wish we had a better answer. And we just don't know the uncertainty of sales tax. We don't know. And the question we ask ourselves is, should we be funding an essential service like our police department with economic related taxes that we have no control over? If we have another 2008 or 2009, you know, what do we do in a growing city with a growing police force? So those are just some of the thoughts, and we will answer specifically more questions. But I would just remind us that even if sales tax comes in better than we projected, which is all of our hope, we still have $200,000 in road funds to make up that we're used to having to maintain roads. I would say that roads aren't in that great a shape. We've done the best we can with the money, so we'd have to restore that. Plus the rainy day fund of $360,000. So we've got some work to do, even if sales tax comes in higher than we projected, which is all of our hopes, I think. That would be what we would want. And I would just throw out the fact that we do hope people shop in our city. We do get sales tax when people shop outside the city, but the leakage we have in our city of people shopping outside of North Ogden is pretty substantial. And if our citizens were spending all their money here in North Ogden, we'd probably be a little bit better off, but we have leakage. And my fear is, as we continue to build further south, that people will pull out, turn right, not left, spend their money. It's a lot of uncertainty, but I want to make a commitment to you that we will continue to watch every dollar. We do look at this as a fiduciary responsibility to be prudent with your money, our money, because we're also paying taxes. So we appreciate the comments tonight, and the council has heard those comments. And we have two council members with us virtually. So they've also heard the comments. So at this point in time, if there's no further comments, Mr. Call, we will move on to item number 2, which is a discussion or actions to consider an ordinance adopting final budget tax rate for fiscal year 2021. And before we have Evan come up, I would entertain any comments or questions from council. Councilwoman Stoker, please.
It's on Mr. Mackley's comment about the safety of our police officers. Since he brought it up, I would, it's okay with council, I'd like to address that. He wanted to know why the officer was fearful when they arrested that drunk driver. Well, if you look at our police department and how it is situated in the parking lot, they're right out there in the open, and the officer and the person that they have, they're right there where everybody can see, and they have no protection going into the police station. And part of the proposal in the new police station is that the safety measure would be there, that they would have the parking for themselves, and the person that they have detained would be able to go into the building without being visible to the public. So that is a big issue and a much needed thing to be addressed. So that was in answer to your question.
Do we have comments from Councilman Barker or Councilwoman Ekstrom?
No, I don't have any.
Councilman Barker. Councilwoman Ekstrom, do you have any comments this evening?
Not anything in particular. I just want to make sure that all of the residents know that we are listening to you. We are taking into consideration all of the things that you're telling us. And I assure you that we are doing our best, but it's always good to point out things. We're not going to get everything, but we do try our best to consider all of the points of view that we can, and appreciate all of the diligence that you as residents take in looking these things over too. It always helps to have extra eyes looking at them, and I appreciate your taking the responsibility as members of the community to make sure that you're involved and to look into these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ekstrom. Since this issue came up, but I don't want to dwell on it, there will be no decision made on the public safety building until we've had a chance to vet this with our citizens, get their input, and scrub that with the chief and the officers. And, Councilman Swanson often reminds me I don't have a vote. He's good at reminding me of that. But I made it very clear that if we move forward with that building, and you've heard me say, I think it's a need we've got to look at. That will be, that bond will be voted upon by the citizens, is what I have to say. So, just so you know where we're heading, and no decisions have been made on that. But I want you to know I have a lot of confidence in our council members, and that they'll work closely with citizens and make sure that we assess that as a need, and what our public safety needs to protect this community and be safe. It's a whole different world right now. So anyway, just wanted to, Councilman Swanson.
I just wanted to make one comment to the Minardi family, Mr. and Mrs. Minardi, I think was their name, that had a question on the sales tax collection. I'd encourage you to come in and visit with our finance director and with our city manager to understand the way that sales taxes are distributed throughout the state. It's a lot like a traffic ticket. The state sets the rate and they get most of the money. We don't get to keep all of the sales taxes that are generated here in North Ogden City. It's distributed throughout the state. Places we benefit, frankly, from places like Riverdale, from Bountiful, Centerville, places like that that got these ginormous, love that word, these huge retail outlets and establishments. So I wish it was as simple as we get to keep every dime of sales tax that is generated here in the city. The reality is we don't. We get to keep a small portion of that. And again, encourage you to come in and visit with our finance director or with our city manager to get a better understanding of how that actually works. It's a complicated thing, but it means that we don't get to keep it all.
If there are no other comments from council.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just, I wanted to mention that the city spends about 6 to 7 to 8 months each year working on the budget. And we've been through quite a process this year, unlike any that I've ever experienced. In May, the council approved a tentative budget. We also held a public hearing in May to receive comments on that. This meeting tonight is our truth and taxation hearing that was required as part of our property tax proposal. And so tonight we have a proposal in the packet to adopt the final budget. And that can be done with the resolution. Or is it an ordinance? I can't remember. It's an ordinance. And the ordinance establishes the property tax rate that was included as part of the budget proposal. And it also includes adoption of the final budget for the city for fiscal year 2021. That will get us through to the end of June of next year. So that's what we would propose, and we're here to answer any questions if you have questions on the budget.
Council members, any questions? I think we're working out pretty hard this year, and thank him for his efforts. This truly has been an unusual effort. I don't think any of us expected that we'd be dealing with this at the time. But I just want to mention one last thing before we go to the council for a motion. I worked with Mr. Call and Evan, and if things get worse than we projected, we have some additional cuts we would make. It wouldn't be pleasant, but we do have that. Additionally, if property taxes do continue to come in, sales tax, excuse me, continues to come in strong, we will look at those non-sustainable cuts we've made and probably restore those because we can't sustain those long term. So we do have a schedule put together to address both the positive and the negative if they come in. We've tried to look at, have a plan A, plan B, and make sure that we're taking care of our great citizens here in North Ogden. So with that comment, council, I would be looking for someone to make a motion to approve ordinance 2020-19. Do we have a motion?
Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 2020-19 as outlined.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Extra to adopt the final budget. Do we have a second on that motion?
I second that.
We have a motion and we have a second. Is there any further discussion, council? That's ordinance number 2020-19, which would be approving the final budget as presented this evening. Any further discussion? If not, we'll take a roll call vote. We'll start with Councilwoman Ekstrom.
Yes.
Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Severing.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for your attendance tonight. Thank you, council, for your hard work. Before we end the meeting tonight, are there any comments from staff that are here with us tonight?
I'll be sending out a few emails to you about upcoming events. So stay tuned.
Okay, any other comments? Council? As your mayor, I want to let you know that we appreciate you coming tonight. We would invite you to visit with us at our city council meetings. We surely don't have all the answers. We try the best we can, but we value your input. So with that, I look for a motion to adjourn. Councilman Swanson has made the motion. Do we have a second to adjourn? Second by Councilwoman Stoker. Paul, we're going to have to get with you after, I think, if we're following proper order.
I just want to thank you, Maureen, and thank you on behalf of all the citizens. Board, we've got a great local government, great state government. In contrast to some of the publicity and insanity around the nation, we are so blessed to live in this community, and you reflect that as a group. I just appreciate all that you do. And I sense there's that general feeling in our community. It's a great place to live. So just thank you. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of adjourning the meeting this evening, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.